All right, ladies and programmers, we're going to do lesson 12. Some elements are game mechanics. We're going to learn a bunch of the elements. Okay, so the mechanics are the procedures and rules of the game. It includes the goal of your game, how players can and cannot win the game, achieve the goal. So like we said before, other types of entertainment like movies have technology, story, and aesthetics, but not mechanics. Like a movie, you know, you have to have the technology, the TV and the DVD. It has a story, obviously, and it looks a particular way, but there's no mechanics. There's no way to win it. So it's the mechanics that make a game a game. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of mechanics. All right, so we want you to be like Superman. We want you to use your X-ray vision to see past the skin and discern the skeleton of the game. Okay, the skeleton is the game mechanics. That's what you build. You build the mechanics so that the player has the skin and has an experience. Game mechanics are the core of what the game truly is. They are the interactions and relationships that remain when all of the aesthetics, technology, and the story are stripped away. Okay, so we're going to talk about the different core mechanics, and here they are. And the first one is going to be space. Okay, so space is where things exist. It's where your player plays. So you have discrete versus continuous. We have different dimensions. You have zero dimensional, one dimensional, two, and three dimensional. Some things have bounded areas. So like you have areas where Mario can go where he can't go. You have bounded areas. So for example, I can put an X only there, but I can't put an X there. Some things are connected. So for example, Mario can go down to a pipe and that'll take you to another connected area. These spaces aren't connected, but it matters where they're at. So if I put an X here, it matters that there's an X right there. So that matters. There's nested spaces. Um, so in tic-tac-toe, is it discrete or continuous? Discrete means that I can't move around. There's just one particular spot I can be. Continuous means it moves around. So is it discrete or continuous? What's the number of dimensions in the game? 0, 1, 2, or 3 dimensional? Are there bounded areas? Is there areas I can move around in a certain spot but not others? And are areas connected? Write that down about the game tic-tac-toe. See what you think. Put that in your notes and I'll quiz you when I'm back. Okay, so in tic-tac-toe, if I put an X there, there, so if you think about it as a bounded area, it's like, okay, I can put an X anywhere in here, I can move it around. But the reality is these all mean the same thing, right? So it's really not a bounded area if you think about it. The reality is it's like 9 discrete spaces, like a spot here where I can't move around. There's zero-dimensional cells because basically I can just put it in the one spot. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really need to move around. And adjacency is important. So if this is next to this is next to this is important, right? So if I put my X there in a video game, should probably just kind of snap there or just count as if it's right there. So that's one way to look at tic-tac-toe in a video game. All right, now let's do Monopoly. Is it discrete or continuous? How many dimensions? Are there bounded areas? Are they connected? Or answer that in your notes. Okay, so it's kind of like a one-dimensional. One-dimensional would be a straight line. Okay, there are 40 discrete points, right? So they kind of go in a straight line, and then when you get to the end, it loops back. It doesn't really matter if you put your, if this is the square, there's the aesthetics of the square, right? You have the square on the board, but if it doesn't matter if you put your player here, here, here. It's really just one discrete space, 40 zero-dimensional cells, and it loops back. This would be a good way to visualize Monopoly if you're making a video game. Obviously, you make it look different than that for the player, but for the design of it. All right, how about a pool table? Same thing, discrete or continuous number of dimensions. Does it have a bounded area, and is it connected? Answer that. Okay, so it's definitely continuous. So if this were to be the pool table, the ball can go anywhere in there, and wherever it goes actually makes a difference, right? So it can move around in a continuous way. It's You can look at it as 2D or 3D. Mostly it's 2D. It's moving around on a flat plane, but every now and then you could have a ball jump another ball, and if you allow that in your game, then you need to look at it as 3D. You can look at it both ways, but if you're at the point where you're allowing a player to jump a ball, then it's 3D. Um, Is it a bounded area? Yes, you have your bounded area of the table. You can't go outside of that border. Are they connected? Not really. When you put the pockets and other things aren't really connected, so you can't get from one world to the next. Okay, there's a thing called nested space. It's a space within a space. It'd be like in a a scrolling game where you're walking around and then you see like a gate and you go into the gate and all of a sudden it opens you up to a whole new world. So it's like you have your big world and then there's an icon for a town or a gate and you go there and it takes you to a new place. So it's a space that exists within a space. So that's called a nested space. Okay, so here's the questions we can ask ourselves. To use the lens of functional space, think about the space in which your game really takes place when all surface elements are stripped away. So not what the player sees, but what's really happening underneath. Is the space of the game discrete or continuous? How many dimensions does it have? What are the boundaries of the space? Are there nested spaces, subspaces? And are they connected? Is there more than one useful way to model the space of the game? So like the pool table where you can think about it 2D sometimes and 3D other times. Alright, so the next core mechanic is time. As we know, time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping into the future. Alright, so enough of that. So time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping in the future, or does it? If you have discrete time, it does it. If you have discrete time, time doesn't matter. It's not moving. So it'd be like a Scrabble game where you have as much time as you want to figure out to take your turn. Or in some video games where you have a turn-based fight where you get to choose whatever you're going to do and then do it. Or like a Pokemon battle with a card game where you decide what you're going to do and do it. Time doesn't really matter. Sometimes a game like chess, it could go both ways. In chess, it doesn't matter unless you're timing, like, okay, you only have 3 minutes to make your move, and then it starts to matter. Then you have continuous time where it does keep moving forward. So like action games or sports where you have to get something done in a particular amount of time. Okay, so give me some examples of clocks in your games. Okay, so any type of game, not just a video game. Sorry. Give me an example of clocks in your game, not just a video game. So what's a game that has some sort of clock in it, a timer? And what's an example of a game that has a race in it? Write that down. Okay, so a sand timer in any of the classic games where you have to get something done before the sand runs out. There's a game clock in football and basketball. You have nested time. So you have the game clock in basketball, and then while the game clock's going, you also have the shot clock where you have to shoot within a particular amount of time, where you have to turn the ball over. And then an example of a race would be an auto race, or in Space Invaders, where you have to race to kill all of the invaders before they touch the bottom. Okay, so it is said that timing is everything. Our goal as designers is to create experiences, and experiences are easily helped or spoiled when they are too short or too long, too fast or too slow. Ask yourself these questions to make yours just the right length. What is it that determines the length of my gameplay activities? Are my players frustrated because it ends too early? What would clocks or races make it more exciting? Um, are the time limits irritating players? Would you be better off without them? And would my game be better with several short rounds that together comprise a larger round? Alright, the next core mechanic is objects, attributes, and states. Okay, so the object is like the noun, it's the character, a prop, a token, a scoreboard, whatever. And the attributes are like the adjectives, it's the categories of information. Make sure you're writing this down. Each attribute has a current state. The state is the current value of the attribute's value. So for example, you have the object in a car game could be the car. An attribute of that car could be speed, and currently that car is going 75. Oops, nope, you just hit the brakes, now it's going 45. So you have your object, your attribute, and then the state, which will change, but you have your current state. So every object has multiple attributes, and those are typically going to be the variables that you're going to create. So for example, a ghost in Pac-Man, his position can be, his X coordinate could be 100 and his Y 200. The objective right now is, oh no, Pac-Man just ate a power pellet, I need to avoid Pac-Man. Oh wait a minute, the timer ran up. Now my goal is to chase Pac-Man, or it could be like, oh, I just got eaten by Pac-Man. My objective is I look like little eyeballs, and my objective is to get back home. The direction he could be going left, right, up, or down. So that's the state. These are the values of the state machine. Okay, so in the tutorial Rollerball, give your own example of an object, an attribute, and a state from Rollerball. So so this is something that programmers will sometimes do. They'll make a chart like this that'll help them figure out how to make sense of all the states. So we're doing it again for Pac-Man. So if he's in the cage, um, so the eyes arrived at the cage. Now he's in the cage. The next thing that's going to happen is it's time to leave the cage. And then his state's going to be he's going to be chasing Pac-Man. And then while that happens, if Pac-Man eats a power pellet, now he turns blue and he's fleeing Pac-Man. So these are each states. Um, if he's eaten by Pac-Man, he goes back to eyes rolling towards the cage. Or if the power pellet timer is almost up, he's flashing. He's still running away from Pac-Man. If the power pellet timer is up, he goes back to chasing Pac-Man, so on and so forth. So you can make sense of all the different states that ghost is going to have. All right, the lens of the state machine. To use this lens, think about what information changes during your game. What are the objects in the game? What are the attributes of the objects? What are the possible states of each attribute? What triggers the state change for each attribute? Game playing is decision making. Decisions are made based on information. Deciding the different attributes or states and what changes them is core to the mechanics of your game. So this is just going to help you actually build the game. Okay, so the next thing is secrets. Think about the game of video poker. In that game, what's secret? What is known by everyone? And when you're playing that, does the computer know the player's hand? And if the computer knows the player's hand, is that fair? And the answer is, even though the computer knows the player's hand, the computer basically has a virtual reality player that's playing against the player, and he shouldn't know, even though the game knows, that computer player shouldn't know, and it needs to be seen as fair. So the lens of secrets. Change who has what information, and you change your game completely. To use this lens, think about who knows what and why. And you can ask yourself these questions. What is known by the game only? What is known by all the players? What is known by some or only one player? What would changing who knows that information improve the game in some way? Would that change it? And if you can create drama in your game, if you change the secrets, so like if you reveal information that was hidden, or all of a sudden conceal information that was once known, you can create some sort of drama in it. Okay, next we have actions. Okay, actions are the verbs of the game mechanics. These are often limited, so you don't have unlimited things that you can actually do in a game. So what are the possible actions of a game that you like? And what are actions that are not available to the game that you like? So basic actions would be like jump, shoot. In checkers, you have move forward, move backwards, jump an opponent, getting kinged. So these are the basic actions, but you use these basic actions for strategic actions. So in checkers, even though you can only move forward and backward and jump, you can move to create a wall, to block, to protect. You can move to force the other player to do an action they don't want. You can sacrifice a player or sacrifice a chip so that you can get the player to move somewhere where you want them to. You can move to get king. So there's all kinds of basic actions that turn into strategic actions, which are how to use the basic actions to achieve goals. Make sure you're writing down the stuff in red. Okay, so there's another thing to consider called emergent gameplay. And so an emergent gameplay is basically as the player continues to play the game, you're adding interesting strategic actions. So he can take the existing actions, or maybe even add new verbs and actions, but can do some more interesting strategic things. So emergent gameplay is interesting resultant actions that emerge out of the user's behavior. So the player is doing stuff, and then now there's new interesting things he can do. So you want to identify these and nurture them. So one way to do this is by adding more verbs. So as the player is playing, all of a sudden you're opening up new basic actions that he can do. Or you can make verbs act on many objects. So for example, you used to be able to shoot a gun. Now you can shoot a gun. Used to be able to shoot a gun to kill the bad guy. Now you can shoot a gun to break a window to get into a new place that you couldn't get into before. You can shoot a gun to draw on the, can shoot on a wall and draw stuff to leave messages for other people. So it makes things more interesting. Another way to create emergent gameplay is to have it to where your goals can be achieved in more than one way. You can have multiple avatars, so your one player can play as different characters. That could be interesting, um, and then actions that can change constraints. Okay, so again, ways to add emergent gameplay, add more verbs and basic actions, but make sure they're only good ones. If you have like 1,000 different things your player can do, it can be confusing. Like I said before, you can have verbs that as you play can act on new objects, and the player has to figure that out. Okay, the lens of emergence. To make sure your game has interesting qualities of emergence, ask yourself these questions. How many verbs does your player have? How many objects can each verb act on? How many ways can players achieve their goals? What triggers the state changes for each attribute? All right, now there's lens 31 to look at. What are the basic actions in the game? What are the strategic actions? What strategic actions would I like the player to figure out and use? How can I change the game to make those possible and kind of lead the player to it? What actions do players wish they could do? Can I enable these either as a basic or strategic actions? All right, now check this out. So new games have few actions. So for example, if you're playing like a platform jumper like Mario, so you can jump and you can shoot and you can wall climb, but there's not a whole lot of things that you can do. And that's kind of, not always, but oftentimes a trend with video games that there's very few verbs. Um, by the way, games with the same actions are similar. So so if you have games that have the same actions, they're going to be the same. So sometimes it might get boring because games all are starting to seem the same if they all can do the same things. So if you can make and come up with a new action, you make a new type of game. So you can have a breakthrough game if you could figure out like, hey, nobody's been able to do this particular thing before. And many video games have limited verbs. Some of the very first games were word games, and they had all kinds of things players could do. It's kind of interesting that we've, in some ways, regressed. You can try going here, but it's I think the school's blocking it. But anyway, you can play online, or if you want to, you can do this. You can go to my website, and you can go to game design. You can go to let's see if we can find this thing. So we can go to game programming, we can go to the art of game design. You can click right here, go to a new tab, and you can click on here. So there's this thing called Zork. You can download it, and there's instructions. You have to look online. So get the instructions for Zork, but you're going to have to make a folder, put this thing in the folder, unzip it, and then if you double click on it, let's see if I can find it for you. Oh yeah. So if you create a folder called Zork 1, go inside there, and then you put in the zip file and you right click and then you unzip it, go to 7-zip and 7-zip, and you extract it here. You're going to get this stuff. If you click on the batch file, the BAT, it's going to open this, and it's going to open up one of the first video games I ever played. You might have to double click on it twice, but anyway, you have to read everything. There's no visuals, it's all read. You have to read it. Okay, so you are standing in an open field west of a white house with a boarded front door. There's a small mailbox here. So I typed in open mailbox. Opening the mailbox reveals a leaflet. Well, what do I want to do with it? I'm going to grab leaflet. So there's all kinds of stuff. You've taken it. So now I can do stuff like I could do odd things. I could eat the leaf. Let's read it first. Let's read. And here's what, if I read the leaflet, welcome to Zork. Zork is a game of adventure, danger, and low cunning, blah, blah, blah. Now I can try something interesting. Eat leaflet. It won't let me do it. At any rate, so if you play this game, I can type in N and it'll take me north. I can try to open the windows and get in, so on and so forth. So it might be fun to play Zork a little bit, just to see that there's all kinds of interesting things available to the character. All right, enough about that. So play a little Zork, and you can see all the verbs that used to be in games. All right. Okay, so we've talked about actions now, rules and goals. The rules tie together and define. All the other things are tied together by the rules. The space, the objects, the actions, and so on and so forth are all tied together by the rules. The goals are, hey, how do you win the game? What are you trying to do? You can't just tell them to do something unless you set up the rules to favor it. So the rules have to work with the goals. So they have to actually be able to accomplish these things. So the rules are the most fundamental mechanic. They're the most important mechanic. A game is not a game without goals. All right, so back in the day, this guy named Parlay, he came up with a analysis of rules, and he came up with this. He came up with this thing. We're not going to talk about this too much, but there's operational rules. That's what the players have to do to play the game. So, for example, if you're having a game with dice, one of the operational rules is you roll a six-sided die and move that many squares around the board. Okay, it's just what the players do. Then there's the foundational rules. It's kind of like what's going on behind the scenes. So um, instead of, you don't really talk about a die because the die doesn't matter. What's really happening is the player will move a random number from 1 to 6. Okay, so those are the foundational rules. Then there's behavioral rules. Okay, you're not allowed to look at the other player's cards. You're not allowed to tickle the player when he's trying to roll the dice. It's just everybody knows these rules. Okay, they're written rules. So oftentimes a game will come with written rules. This is the documented rules of the game, but nobody really reads these anymore. So now what they do now in video games, at least, you just basically start playing the game, and it teaches you the rules as you play. That's kind of a better way to do it with video games. So that'd be a nice thing for you guys to do. Here, there's laws. These are enforced rules, usually for competitions. So, like if you're going to like a serious competition, they'll have laws. So, for example, if you're playing Halo, it'd be a death match using only pistols, and no screen cheating. You can't look at somebody's screen to see where they're at, sort of thing. So, these are the laws for competitions. So eventually you'll have the written rules and the laws, and they'll become the official rules, a little bit more standard as written rules merge with the laws after time. So for example, now the official rules of chess say that you have to say checkmate when you first put your player in checkmate. So that used to not be part of the written rules, but now it's part of the official rules. Then there's advisory rules. These are just things like, oh, you don't have to do this, but you'll probably win better if you do this. And then there's house rules. That's rules you make up at your house. So a local modified version of the written rules. Okay, so when you make goals for a player, they need to be concrete, like they know what it is, they can actually do it, understandable, they can achievable, rewarding and fun to actually do it. And then there could be short-term goals, long-term goals, and then like a series of goals. So here's some questions you can ask yourself to make your game better. By the way, so cheatability is something to think about when it comes to rules. You need to have a rule enforcer in your game. So what's going to keep people from cheating? Because if players are playing and they think, even if it's not true, if they think that the other player can cheat, all of a sudden, all the precious endogenous value that you've worked so hard to develop slips away. So before, people were like, oh, I really want to win. Oh, I really want to do this and that. And all of a sudden, if they think people are cheating, it's like there's no value to it anymore, and they'll quit playing, which is not what you want. Alright, here's the lens of rules. Use this lens to look deep into your game until you can make out its most basic structure. Ask yourself these questions. What are the foundational rules? How do these differ from the operational rules? Are there laws or house rules that are forming as the game develops? Should these be incorporated into my game directly? Are there different modes in my game? Do they make things simpler or more complex? Would the game be better with more or less modes? And who enforces the rules? It's important that people know that nobody's cheating. Are the rules easy to understand, or are they confusing? If confusing, should I change the rules or explain them more clearly? And then the lens of goals. To ensure the goals of the game are appropriate and well balanced, ask yourself these questions. What is the ultimate goal of my game? Is the goal clear to players? If there are a series of goals, do the players understand that? Are the different goals related to each other in a meaningful way? Are my goals concrete, achievable, and rewarding? Do I have a good balance of short and long-term goals? And do players have a chance to decide their own goals? All right, next, skill. The core mechanic of skill. So the user's level of ability is a skill, and there's different categories of skill. There's physical skill. So for example, you need physical skill in DDR, so you're dancing or Guitar Hero because you're actually doing something with your legs and hands. Then there's mental skills when you're like solving a puzzle. Then there's social skills in multiplayer games where you have to work on a team or work against a team. All right, so you have to find a balance of skill, right? So if you require too much skill and it's too difficult, then people are going to be anxious. If it's not, there's too little difficulty and too little skill required, they're going to be bored. So you gotta find that sweet spot of balancing difficulty and skill. All right, so you have some questions for yourself. What skills does my game require from the user? Are the categories of skills that you're missing? Could you add some physical skill that people need? Which skills are dominant and should it be? Are these skills creating the experience that I want? Does the game demand the right level of skill? And then remember, there's real versus virtual skills. So for example, if you somehow like upgrade your character and now they all of a sudden have a level 75 sword skill, and so you give your character more health, you've created virtual skill without necessarily creating using real skill. So you don't want to overdo the virtual skill to where people are like, hey, I don't even need any real skill to win this game. Okay, so here is the lens. Use this lens to stop looking at your game and start looking at the skills you are asking of the players. And here's the question. Does the thing make the game feel unfair? Can players improve their skills with practice? Does this game demand the right level of skill? Are some players much better at these skills than others? And is that okay? Is that the way you want it? And should you balance that out or not? Are these skills creating the experience I want? So on and so forth. All right, chance. So there's got to be probably going to be some chance in the game. Surprises are an important source of human pleasure and the secret ingredient of fun. Chance is an essential part of a fun game because chance means uncertainty. Uncertainty means surprises, and surprises means fun. So you probably ought to have some sort of chance in there. So chance is when things happen randomly in a game. So uncertainty equals surprises equals good fun. So here's some things to think about. So in a programming IDE like Unity, there's lots of ways to do random stuff. Okay, so there's different ways to do it. So you can do a random seed, fixed seed, always a different route value, same sequence of values. And these are some technical things that you can do to make things more or less random. So here's some things that you can look at and think about, but different ways to create randomization in Unity. So getting it right is tricky, and so we can research that and explore that a little bit later on. But you make things random in the right way. So you have probability versus people's skill. So for example, if monsters are appearing randomly, it's going to really affect the way people behave. So like if somebody wants to go into a room, what are the odds of there being a monster in there? And then if there is a monster in there, can I kill it? So what are the odds of me killing a monster for one would find me in the room? If the probability is high, you're going to actually go in. If it's low, they're not going to go in. Okay, so here's the lens of chance. Use this lens to focus on the parts of your game that involve randomness and risk, keeping in mind that those two things are not the same. Ask yourself these questions. What in my game is truly random and what just feels random? Does the randomness give the players positive feelings of excitement and challenge or negative feelings of hopelessness and lack of control? Would changing my probability distribution curves improve my game? So basically, is there better ways to come up with randomness? Do players have the opportunity to take interesting risk? And what is the relationship between chance and skill in the game? All right, and that's it. So now we're going to go on to the next part. which is using these things to come up with a better